They invaded Russia. And over the next 2 months, they conquered 2,000 miles of Russian territory. And Russians, they just retreated. Just kept retreating. And this powerful army basically suffered almost no casualties. And they, in August of that year, 2 months later, they found themselves on the banks of the river Volga, overlooking the city of Stalingrad, which is a huge city. And they interviewed a man who lived in that city before the war started. And he said it was a lovely city. And all I remember from that interview was him saying, we had 5 universities and we had 3 theaters. And he said, I found that I could have all of my needs taken care of in that city. They had public transportation and schools and beautiful river, he says. He says fishing was just unbelievable because the river Volga was just teeming with fish. And he said, we just had a wonderful, wonderful time. So they knew that they were going to be attacked, but it was summer. It was beautiful. They were getting ready for it. Germans, they just were winning everywhere they went. They had no doubt that it was going to take them less than a week to conquer this city. And in August, sometimes middle of August, I think it was August the 14th or something like that, they started bombing the city. This beautiful, sprawling city. Green, lush with trees and gardens and so on. And in the first 24 hours, 40,000 people died. And the bombing went for 2 weeks until there was nothing left. Not one building was left standing. And the army, the 6th Army, was waiting for the bombing to be over. And when it was over, then they went in. And they started fighting. And they thought it was going to be done soon, but the problem was that all the soldiers, Russian soldiers and population and the city, that they were all waiting in the basements. One of the German officers said the first defenses that we came across, it was a battery and they were shelling us, and we took them out real quick. And he says, but when we came there to that spot where we killed everybody, to our horror, it was all women. So at this point, Russians have everybody, women, men, everybody was going to fight. House to house, basement to basement. History says that this was the bloodiest and the most significant battle of the World War II. And time went by, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Now you're getting into September. Germans, they started the war in June. They came to Russia in light clothes. They didn't have boots. They didn't have supplies. They planned for this to be over soon. And then October came. And then it started getting colder. At one point, when the first freeze came one night, they say that the temperature fell to minus 50 degrees Celsius. That's like minus 70. And people were freezing left and right. The river just froze over. The Russian soldiers were pushed all the way to the banks of the river. There was no place for them to go. So the battle went for 3 months. And Russians, they just put together all of their main army in the back. And they just put all of their ducks together. And when Germans were tired and exhausted and frozen, they sent 1 million soldiers and encircled the city. 2 weeks earlier, Hitler was proclaiming that the war was going to be over. We are winning. Out of 285,000 soldiers that went in, only 5,000 came back alive after World War II. Everybody else was destroyed. In that city, 1 million people died in that battle. And it was a turning point in the war. And Russians, of course, they won. Americans won. British won. World War II was won. And as I was watching the documentary and saw, years later, the Russians allowed those German soldiers who survived to go back. Years later, in the 50s, 10 years later, they spent, those who were left alive, they spent 10 years in labor camps. And you see the footage of these soldiers. Now they when the war started, they were in their 20s. Now, 10, 15 years later, they're old, exhausted men coming back to their country. And I ask myself, who won? Nobody won. Battle was over, but the city was destroyed. 3 months later, the silence came back to the city once again, and the quiet. But the city was not green anymore. There was no more theaters or schools or hospitals or universities or streets or life or anything. It was gone. Same thing with Germany. It was completely destroyed, devastated. My father was in Germany during World War II, and he says, he used to tell me stories. He says, we always thought that Germany was going to win. He was in labor, working in German factories. He says, always on the radio, they would say Germany was winning. And he says, then one morning I got up and we heard a noise. And the noise was like Niagara Falls. I don't know how many of you have been there. I took my dad there once. And he says it was just like that. It was overwhelming. And it was coming from the sky. And he says at that point I saw what looked like thousands and thousands of American airplanes. They were coming. He says the sky was dark with airplanes. And he says, when I saw that, I knew that Germany was going to lose. Because by the time that wave of airplanes came and flew over that city where my dad was completely devastated. It was gone. Wiped from the face of the earth. That's what's called defeat. That's what's called defeat. And I was looking at this and I thought, defeat is when you come to a point where you can't go any further. And if you look at these pictures of Stalingrad and Berlin and London and all of these other places, you see nothing but devastation. I put up one picture of how Stalingrad looked after the battle was done. That's defeat. We suffer defeats all the time. I told you earlier when we were having our prayer time about a friend of mine who I know from a coffee shop. She's 70 years old, stage 4 cancer. And she told me Thursday, I think it was, Thursday morning, she was going to go on a cruise in March, but she went to see a doctor, and her doctor said to her, don't plan out that far. Don't plan anything out that far. 5 months ahead. And she says to me, I'm going to stay positive. I'm going to stay positive. You know there is nothing they can do for her. How many people would fold up under a pressure like that? They interviewed one of the German soldiers who was there at that battle, who survived. And he says they would send us these young replacements. And he says a lot of times these young guys would come, and after a day or two, they would throw away their gun, and they would walk around fumbling and just talking nonsense, gibberish, and they completely lost their minds. They couldn't handle the pressure. They just couldn't handle the pressure. And if you see one of these documentaries, he just brings the horror of war and defeat, brings home so vividly. And a lot of these men, seasoned in war, once they are interviewed and once they recollect one of those memories, they just start crying. 30, 40, 50 years later. Defeat comes to us in many forms. It can be in the form of bad health. It can be in the form of a failed relationship. It can be in the form of a lost job. It can be in a form of a bad news. You name it. It's a part of life. How do we deal with it? And we're going to look here at the story of major defeat for Jesus and his disciples. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit, just spend a little time on this first page of the outline that gives you 10 steps on how to deal with the defeat. We're going to do that first, and then we're going to look at the gospel story in Matthew 14. Theodore Roosevelt said the following: "Far better is it to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much, because they live in a gray twilight that knows not victory nor defeat." Well, I think what he's trying to say there is those who try and those who fight will fail. And then on occasion they will also win. But those who never try, those who want to stay within their comfort zone, who want to stay in that gray area where there is no victory or defeat, those are the true losers. Those are the poor spirits. Those are the ones who never experience life. Those are the ones who are seeking comfort instead of taking a risk. They interviewed these Russian soldiers, women, and they said, no question we were going to defend our city. There was no question. No retreat. We were going to stay there and die. Failure, losing your life, that was fine. But they were not retreating. How do you deal with defeat? Step number 1, look in the mirror every morning and every night and say to yourself, I cannot be defeated. No surrender. Because any one single defeat really is not the end of the game unless a person gives up. Unless you give up. Maybe your wife is leaving you or your husband. Maybe your doctor says, hey, don't make any plans too far out. Maybe your job just got taken away from you. Maybe not, maybe even unfairly. So how you deal with it is you can either say, okay, forget it, I give up. I failed once in this, I'm going to fail all the time. I'm not going to try anymore. I'm not going to try. I had a relationship once, I'm never going to have another one. Because the first one didn't work out. I tried losing weight, I couldn't do it, so now, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm going to stay, keep eating, and don't worry. I'm not going to worry about it. Give up. You know, I applied for a job, they turned me down. I wanted really that good job, $100,000 a year. But they turned me down. Maybe I'm just not good enough. Maybe I'm not qualified. Maybe I should just go work in McDonald's. No offense to anybody who works at McDonald's. You got to be a manager if you're over 30. You see? But there's the idea. Do you give up? Or do you say, no, I cannot be defeated. I lost the battle, but I'm going to go on. If you feel defeated, take action. Do something. Perseverance. And this is what happens to a lot of people. They get defeated and they stop. They stop fighting. They give up. They settle for a bad relationship. They settle for a bad job. They settle for the weaknesses that they have in their life, bad habits that have overtaken their daily existence. And they just give up. Take action. And then gain perspective. Number 3, why do I feel defeated? Ask yourself. There are so many people in the world less fortunate than I am, but happier than I am. Perspective is extremely important. I had a friend of mine on the radio show the other day, Philip, and he comes from Bermuda, a wealthy country where he had done really well for himself. And he told me, he says, one time I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I couldn't sleep, and God was telling me that I need to do something for others. And he says, next day I got on a plane and I went to New York, and from New York I went to Haiti because they don't have a direct flight. And he says, I arrived in Haiti and I just had the impression to do something there because country is super poor. And he eventually, to make a long story short, eventually he started an orphanage that runs to this day. But one thing he told me, he says, when I went to Haiti, that was the first time that I understood the difference between hungry and starving. And I said, well, what is it? He says, hungry is when you go to McDonald's and you wonder, should I have my burger with cheese or without cheese? He says, that's hungry. He says, starving is when you go to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and they kill a chicken, and they cut it into 100 pieces, and everybody eats. And then the homeless lady, after everybody's gone, comes by and picks up pieces of skin from the sidewalk and puts it on a fire, and she eats that. That's starving. And I thought to myself, we've lost our perspective living in this country. We complain about all kinds of things that we really should not have any right to complain about. So again, when you feel that you're defeated, align your perspective. Find the right perspective. Ask yourself, why do I feel defeated when there are so many who are in a 100 times worse situation than I am? When you feel defeated, remind yourself that defeat is an attitude, not an outcome. It's all about the attitude. It's all about what's in here. Do you have a heart? People with heart, they have the attitude that says, I'm going to go no matter what. I'm going to do it. I'm going to try it. I'm not going to be held back. I'm not going to be scared. I'm not going to be afraid. Maybe I lost this one, but I'm not going to lose the next one. So what kind of an attitude do you have? Another point is self-pity. Stop crying about spilled milk. Don't wallow in self-pity. Get out and do something. Poor me, that's like the most popular excuse in America. Poor me. My mom didn't teach me, my dad didn't give me anything. Everybody's against me. We got a lot of this. That's just a fact of life. This poor me syndrome. We need somebody to hold our hand. We need somebody to help us out. We need somebody to give us a hug. We need somebody to, government to give us money. Pastor Gordon to baby us, We can't stand anymore direct, honest criticism. Because, oh, poor me, my feelings are going to get hurt. So we can't hear somebody say, hey, you know what, buddy, you better get your butt in gear and get this fixed up. We don't want to hear that. Because right away it's poor me. Then alternatives. Sometimes you're going to be defeated. Just a way of life. You're not going to get everything you want in your life. You're not going to get necessarily the job that you wanted. You're just not. You're not going to be able to buy a $100,000 Cadillac. Well, go buy a Subaru, Toyota. They're still good cars. You don't need to punch your head through the wall. Find an alternative. Change the situation. And you can do this with just about any problem. If you see that it's not happening, change the situation. Change the approach. Be creative. Change your style. You don't have to go in one direction all your life. When I was talking to Marilyn, my friend with cancer, she says to me, well, I said to her, where's all your friends? Because, it used to be a time when I would go there and there was a whole bunch of them sitting at the table, and now she's by herself. And she says, I got rid of them. I said, why? She said, I don't want to be around negative people. She says, I'm sick, stage 4 cancer. She said, I don't want to be around. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, every time we get together, it's negative this, negative that. It's about politics. It's about, all kinds of stuff. Negative. And she says, I just told them I can't be around you guys anymore. I want to live my life. I want to be positive. And she has her calendar in front of her, and she's writing in when she's going to have lunch with her daughter and when she's going to go to dinner with her friends and to a movie, and she's planning her life. She wants to live her life. She says, I don't want to be around negative people. They bring me down. They bring down my spirit. They help you be defeated. You listen to all the negative stuff that's out there in the world, you're going to feel depressed and defeated all the time. And to me, it was a paradox because all of her friends are retired. They have money. They have homes. They have their health. They have their families. And they are all negative. And here she is. And she's positive. We just don't appreciate what we got. We really don't. I'm going to Indonesia at the end of the month. No toilet paper, no running water. You get me? We shouldn't be complaining about nothing. Our defeats here in this country, we have not had, I've been here since 1975. I don't remember one bad year that we had here. People say, Carter, Jimmy Carter. And I say, Jimmy Carter what? Gas went from 50 cents to 70, and that's what you complain about? In Europe, it was $5. Since 1929, since Great Depression, we had nothing but good in this country. And it's going to continue, I believe. Hang out with positive people. Tune out all the stuff that's negative. Tune out the words can't and failure and it's bad. Tune it out. Say yourself different stuff. I get up in the morning and I say, Lord, thank you for the good things you're going to put in my life today. And He does. Thank you for the good things you're going to put. You do your own way. You don't have to say that prayer, but you say something to yourself that's positive. I'm going to be all right. My life is going to be all right. Why? Because my God is on my side. That's why. Give back something to society. Go out, volunteer. Come out on the street beat ministry once a month, and your attitude is going to change. And you're going to see yourself in a totally different light when you see what other people are experiencing. And then take care of your spirit. Go to church. Meditate. Take care of your heart, of your soul. It's not enough to exercise your body. You got to take care of your, connect with God. Let Him recharge you. That's why we are here today. For God to recharge us. Because when we go back out, we got to deal with problems and defeats. An enemy. You see? So that's why we come to church. And I want to encourage you, keep coming. Keep coming. This is a time when Jesus is here. This is a time when He wants to speak to you. And then last one, grace. Extend yourself grace. You will make mistakes. If you make mistakes, say you're sorry. Move on. Give yourself grace. Don't beat yourself up. We're all humans. We're going to make mistakes. So, the steps that I just gave you is practical stuff on how to handle defeat. Now I want to give you the spiritual side of how to handle defeat. And this story is in Matthew 14. And we're going to unpack this chapter over the next 3 weeks. The first part is today. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He's been raised from the dead. That's why these miraculous powers are at work in him." Herod was a king, And you know what he did, right? He had John killed. You know why he had John killed? For Herod had seized John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. Because John had been saying to him, it is not lawful for you to have her. So what Herod did is he took his brother's wife as his own. He was a king. And she wanted to be with him, this woman. And John, he preached against it. He says to the king, he said, you cannot have her. That's against the law. John was a teacher. John was a prophet. John had thousands of people following him. John baptized Jesus. I just want to give you the picture of this moment in history. You got John, and you have his disciples, and you have Jesus, and you have his disciples, and they are going out there and proclaiming the kingdom of God. Jesus is raising people from the dead. Thousands are following John and Jesus. The disciples of Jesus, they are in the middle of this tremendous moment in history when they see that something supernatural is taking place. And they are excited. The gospel is being preached. The salvation is being brought to the whole world. You see I'm trying to paint the picture of the atmosphere that surrounded them. Sometimes you and I, we get excited and we work for the Lord and we preach and we tell our neighbors and we go out there and do ministry, you see, and we are like, this is great. We are winning the world for Jesus. But you know what else is going on? Somebody else is at work. This is where defeats come from. Another power. The power of darkness is working. And he wanted to kill John. But he feared the people because they held him to be a prophet. He didn't like what John was telling him, so he wanted to kill him. And then his birthday came, Herod's. And the daughter of Herodias, his illegitimate wife, danced before the company. And she pleased Herod, so that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she wanted. Huge party, birthday party, just like for Pastor Gordon. Where is the wine? No wine? He had a little too much, right? He had one too many. And she was dancing, and he said to her in front of everybody, I'm going to give you whatever you want. Huge mistake. You see? Because what did she do? She went to her mother, and she says, what should I ask for? And her mother says, ask for John's head on a platter. And now because he spoke up in front of all of his ministers and subordinates, and he made the promise, he couldn't go back on it, you see. And the king was sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison. Think about the defeat for God's people. And his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it. And then they went and told Jesus. This is the first part of this chapter. The first part could be titled Defeat. Defeat. They were just progressing like crazy. And then boom. John becomes the first martyr. How many more did Satan had killed throughout the history after John? How many more did lose their heads and their bodies and their families and burned at the crosses and stakes? Defeat is going to come because there is somebody who is working against you. If you follow God, if you pray, if you go to church, if you believe in Jesus, then I want to tell you, you're going to have problems. You're going to have defeats. It's going to come after you. That's just a fact of life. They came, they took the body, and they buried it, and they went and told Jesus. And when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. This is why I say the power of solitude. And I put the picture there of the Sea of Galilee and maybe what a desolate place looked like. Why did Jesus go to a desolate place? Did he go because he was scared? He wasn't scared. He wasn't afraid. Did he go because he was defeated? Did he go because he wanted to give up? Did he go because he had had enough? Did he go because he was ready to throw in the towel? I bet you a lot of his disciples were ready to throw in the towel. I mean, imagine you just keep rolling and then all of a sudden, boom, you get stopped in your tracks. It appeared like Satan was winning. But Jesus went to a solitary place because he wanted to get recharged with the power of God. He wanted to allow that Holy Spirit to come in and fill him. Because he knew that the battle was just beginning. Reminds me of that war story that I told you. While they were battling for the city, the main army was regrouping and putting all of their ducks in order because they knew that the main battle was still yet to come. So maybe you have a defeat here and there, but you haven't lost until you give up. And Jesus wasn't going to give up. Ephesians tells us, and I want to close with this. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. That's why Jesus went to a solitary place. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. And then this is what everybody needs to remember, this next sentence. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. There are invisible to us spiritual beings out there. They're called rulers. There are rulers out there that we don't see, and authorities, beings of evil in the heavenly places. And they are working against you and I. It says we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Our fight is with that invisible force that we don't see. It was striking to me that these people in that city, they thought, one guy says, I didn't think it was ever going to happen to us. We heard that the German army was advancing, but we never thought it was going to get to us. They enjoyed strolls through the city streets and fishing on the river and going to the theaters, while 500-600 miles in the background, there was a storm of war coming for them. You see, And you and I, we go to church, we study. Sometimes we let go and we relax too much. And we think it's not going to happen to us. That's why the Bible reminds us we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against a determined and relentless force. We wrestle against a force that does not need sleep or food or rest, that has no morals or mercy, that's out there to basically destroy us. That's who we wrestle against. And that's why Jesus went to a solitary place. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Preparation. Stand therefore. Stand therefore. It doesn't say lay back. It doesn't say relax. It doesn't say back off. It says stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth. Standing means that you are ready. Standing means that you're not sleeping. Standing means that you're ready to go. Having fastened on the belt of truth and having put on the breastplate of righteousness. And you can read the rest of this in Ephesians chapter 6. What it is that we need to do. And I want to tell you in closing, the way to do this, the way to prepare for these battles so that we do not lose in the end, is to have alone time with God. When we come back next week, we're going to look at what happens next after Jesus had the alone time with God. And you know who wins, right? And you know how it's all going to end. But are you and I going to be ready for that moment? I want to encourage you, really. I hope that you take this seriously, this last thing I want to tell you. Take alone time with God this week. Somewhere. 10 minutes a day. Just you and God. And recharge. Fill up. Get ready for the battles that are coming. God bless you. Amen.